Clare Daly. 10 minutes.
Thanks, Corla, and I think this is a hugely substantial body of work which was very difficult for Deputy Wallace to introduce in 15 minutes. On the surface, I think on Garda Síochána enjoy a very high level of public support and confidence, but scratch that surface and quite quickly a different picture appears. For most citizens in the course of their life, they hardly cross the path of a guard, maybe to get a passport signed, deal with a speeding offence or whatever. And even that isn't as straightforward as that maybe once was with the revelations in the recent ticket fixing scandal and so on. But it's really only when something happens, when somebody becomes a victim of a major crime or some other accidental event which leads their path to cross that of Garda Síochána, that people get a real experience of how our Garda force emerges and a very different picture begins to become clear. Now, as a result of myself and the other deputies here highlighting the revelations in the ticket fixing allegations, and indeed in my own arrest earlier this year, we were contacted by people the length and breadth of this country. People, many of whom are in the gallery tonight, people looking for help and justice, people with horrific stories about how their lives connected with Garda Síochána. Some of those stories were unbelievable. Some of them happened a long time ago, and you would realise that those people will never get justice. Many lives destroyed, but absolutely clearly too many of them to think that this wasn't something more than unexceptional, that what we have here is an enormous problem regarding lack of accountability for the actions of Garda Síochána, actions which are undermining the work of honest Gardaí, are undermining victims of crime and indeed the rights of all ordinary citizens. And as Deputy Wallace said, the blue wall of silence is as impenetrable as it was when Justice Morris made his deliberation. Incidents of negligence, perjury, corruption, mistreatment of vulnerable people and a total lack of accountability. And shocking and all as that might be, to us I think what is more shocking is the fact that absolutely nothing was done about it. When people try and do something, not only do they get nowhere, but they actually end up often being worse off. Now, I could be here all day dealing with specific cases where people innocently, if you like, cross the path of what we'll call a connected person, and we don't have time for that. But I can say that there are people in this gallery whose lives have been absolutely destroyed by their interaction with Garda Síochána. I have a man in my own area who employed 12 people, who an employee of his set up a rival business. That employee was in a relationship with a detective. The detective harassed and intimidated that man out of business and the 12 employees with him. A non-Irish-born taxi driver who refused to give a drunk Garda a lift on New Year's Eve found himself harassed and intimidated to the extent that he had to give up his licence. A couple here, loving grandparents who moved down the country, who happened to live beside a woman who was well connected with a Garda. Brought to court, the woman here in the gallery was a victim of assault, and it ended up that her and her husband became the victims of ongoing Garda persecution, tens of thousands of euros spent in the courts to vindicate their good name. And while these citizens fell foul of the Guards, at the same time, the organisation, the state organisation charged with protecting their rights and dealing with their complaints, GSOC, had to take the incredibly unprecedented step this year to go public because of the lack of cooperation with Garda Síochána. What message does that give to the Minister sitting here tonight? 2 months after they published that report, issuing statements saying that they had grave concerns for informant handling, issues which were well highlighted by Morris but not implemented, where they documented that it was highly unsatisfactory, the level of cooperation that they got from the Gardaí, issues that they said caused a significant and detrimental impact on their investigations. And I would say that in a quiet way their steps were quite revolutionary, because if this is the way Garda Síochána treat the state's body that is charged with investigating complaints, Well, God help poor members of the public who have to deal with them, because quite frankly, they have been brazen in their disregard. They have been blatant in their ignoring of the legal protocols where they are supposed to furnish information to GSOC in a timely manner. They have responded and said to GSOC, why are you asking for that information? The neck of them, they are obliged to provide it. We have had them moving from a position where GSOC were automatically entitled to be furnished with all Garda circulars to that information now being withdrawn, and GSOC being told, well, if you want a circular, ask us for it. How would GSOC even know that such a circular was issued? This is activity that is going on since GSOC published its report. And our question really to the Minister is, what are you going to do about it? When your party was in government, when the Labour are in opposition, when the Labour Party was in opposition, ye all called for an independent police authority to oversee the activities on Garda Síochána. Now you're in power, you have a chance to do something about it. But we have to go back to brass tacks, really. If you look about this situation, there does need to be a culture change starting from the very top of Garda Síochána, and we only have to look at the penalty point situation to explain that point. Here we had an honest, decent Garda who wanted to make the force better, who wanted to fulfil his legal obligation to report malpractice. He went to the confidential recipient went to you, and you went back to the Garda Commissioner. And that Garda is in a very vulnerable position now. There was an investigation. We believe the practice has re-engaged now because no action has been taken to deal with it. But the Commissioner was on record before the investigation even started to say that there was no case to answer. Now, we have been inundated by Gardaí around the country telling us to keep raising these issues. If you have a system where somebody inside the pack, a decent Garda, tries to expose these issues and they don't get protected, well then what hope is there for transparency beyond that? And we believe that under the proposals that we're putting forward for a new independent board, that this could be a way of facilitating the whole area of changing the confidential recipient situation, have them answerable to the board, to have true independence, because it's absolutely necessary to protect decent Gardaí. But instead, the reality is that not only are those Gardaí not being protected, but they're being ostracised and demonised. At the same time, we've examples of Gardaí whose behaviour has been found to be far less than appropriate, and that those people haven't experienced any disciplinary action at all. Not only is that reprehensible to the individuals at the heart of the malpractice, but it costs the state money. Let's remember, Morris cost 60 million. Claims against the state have cost 34 million. And we have to say that the lessons aren't being learned, Minister, by your government. The knowledge of these cases is out there, but from where we're sitting, very little has been done. And you only have to look at the DPP's report in 2001 into the West Cork murder case of Sophie Toscan de Plantier, which Deputy Wallace referred to, where the DPP said that a prosecution of Ian Bailey wasn't warranted on the basis of the evidence. In actual fact, the Supreme Court have categorised the activity of the Gardaí as breathtaking misbehaviour in that instance. The DPP dealt with issues where the investigating Garda, Jim Fitzgerald, gave hash, cash and cigarettes to a drug user with criminal convictions in order to obtain incriminating evidence against Ian Bailey. Not only was there no action...
I'd ask you not to be naming individuals that are not here to defend themselves.
Thank you, Count Hall. I was just referring to the DPP's report, but that's fine. Not only was there no disciplinary action taken against that Garda, but the state actually sent him to France to assist the French authorities with their investigation. The same Garda who was involved in other cases which resulted in people being incarcerated, incarcerations later found to be unlawful, and which will undoubtedly cost the state a huge amount of money. Not only that, but we have the revelations in the recent GSOC report where the Ombudsman in an unprecedented way highlighted their grave concerns about the handling of informants, and yet it is our understanding that the chief handler of the informant at the centre of the Kieran Boylan case has recently been appointed as Assistant Commissioner. Now, we believe that the Minister has to address these issues. As each day goes by, these problems are being compounded. Justice Morris said that unless there were systematic changes implemented, then Donegal would happen all over again. And let's remember Donegal. People being framed for murders that never happened, planting drugs, finding bombs, false arrests and all the rest of it. In our opinion and in our experience, Donegal is happening again. It's happening in the Midlands, it's happening in parts of Limerick, it's happening in parts of West Cork that the other deputies will deal with. And the challenge that this government, in the interests of all citizens, in the interests of decent Gardaí and in the interest of making our society a civilised place, is are you going to listen to the body of evidence from GSOC, from all human rights organisations and from everybody else, and actually implement legislative changes that can make this situation better for all?
Thank you, Deputy.